Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, staff writer Zach Everson. Zach, thanks so much for joining me.
Great to be here, Brittany.
Zach, it seems like you are a bit back on the Ted Cruz beat, and you're writing for Forbes. The Texas senator is the subject of yet another Watchdog complaint. And the story really begins back in the fall of 2022. So can you walk us there?
Sure. Yeah, I got to take a little vacation from the Trump beat and go back to the Cruz beat. So back in October 22, the Texas Republicans announced that his podcast was going to be produced and distributed by iHeartMedia. He said at the time, this thing for the podcast is just a big damn deal. And it turns out, as we're still talking about it, it very well may be. At the time, a complaint was filed by Campaign Legal Center because iHeartMedia is actually not just an audio company, but it also has a lot of lobbyists. It's spent over $50 million in lobbying over the last 20 years. It is the successor to Clear Channel. So campaigns are not allowed to knowingly accept gifts from registered lobbyists, and Campaign Legal was arguing that distribution and production of this podcast was a gift. We find out in February that the Senate Ethics Panel decided that was not a violation of the rules. But here we go again. Some news broke last week, I guess it was, or maybe 2 weeks ago, and we're looking at another complaint from Campaign Legal over Ted Cruz for this podcast deal.
When I read your story and you laid out that iHeartMedia is a registered lobbyist, is this something that's public? Is this something that Ted Cruz and the general public would know? And they spent $50 million. How are they spending this money?
I don't know if they would know it, but they certainly can. I mean, you can just go to look at the disclosures. They're on the Senate website, the House website. They both have the same information, and you can go right there and look up the documents, and you can see what issues they've lobbied on. Who they've hired from, who's been a conflicted, who may have worked in the House or Senate before. So there's no shortage of that info that's available if anybody cared to look for it.
And Campaign Legal Center and End Citizens United accused Cruz of violating federal campaign finance laws. So before we get into the nitty-gritty there, who are these groups?
Campaign Legal is a nonpartisan group that is aimed at protecting democracy, voting rights, getting big money out of politics. It was formed by a former Republican commissioner of the Federal Election Commission. End Citizens United is a group of former Democratic operatives whose goal is to, it's nice when they just put it in the name. They're looking to end Citizens United.
And are iHeart's payments to Truth and Courage violating campaign finance laws? What is the argument here?
Sure. So we found out a couple weeks ago, Molly Bohannon, my colleague here at Forbes, broke the story that iHeartMedia paid a pro-Cruz super PAC $215,000 for digital revenue. And then if we go back and look through it a little more, you see the total goes back, it's $630,000, and it goes back to March of 2023. The argument here is that politicians or political office holders, candidates for federal office, are not supposed to be involved in super PACs. Super PACs can deal with unlimited amounts of money from donors. They can also deal with a whole bunch of donors that are prohibited from giving to political campaigns, such as corporations. So what the two NGOs here are arguing is that by the super PAC receiving ad money that's a result of Cruz's podcast, Cruz is clearly in some way interacting on behalf of the podcast, on behalf of the super PAC, and that's something that is illegal.
And this is not just a little bit amount of money. This is over $500,000. So how has Senator Ted Cruz responded, and how has iHeart responded?
Cruz has responded, not to us. I did send him a message this morning. I haven't heard back as soon as this news broke. But Cruz has got on the offensive a little bit. He's complained and said that these charges were brought about by liberal groups during an election year, which is partially true. I mean, one of them's from a liberal group, the other is nonpartisan. He also has pointed out that he beat these charges in the past with the Senate Ethics Committee. That investigation, however, didn't include the fact that the proceeds from this podcast were going to his super PAC. I mean, this is a whole nother issue that we're facing right here, and one that could very easily take a couple years to resolve. iHeartMedia, for its part, has just pointed out that it's explained that yes, the money that's going to the super PAC is a result of Cruz's podcast, ad revenue from the podcast, and they're just pointing out that Cruz is a volunteer for the website, for the podcast. He's not getting paid for his time, but obviously, $630,000 did flow to a pro Ted Cruz super PAC. So it certainly looks like there is some sort of, compensation going on here.
Zach, like I alluded to at the top, you're back on the Ted Cruz beat. This isn't the first issue you and I have talked about, controversy surrounding the Texas Republican and money. So remind us of those situations.
Yeah, so Ted Cruz loves the line, loves crossing over it, walking it, tiptoeing around it. He was the subject of an investigation earlier over whether or not he used campaign funds to illegally promote his book. And originally, the Federal Election Commission found that he had done that, but when they presented preliminary findings to him, he came back and said, the royalties I got from that deal, I actually donated them to charity. And then they, in the 6-0 decision, ruled that he was not in violation. Now, what took Ted Cruz all that time to come up with the information that and show it to the FEC that he had donated the royalties? Not quite sure. He certainly knew he'd been under investigation for quite some time. But I think it's an example right there of I think that the Texas Republicans seeing what he can get away with. And then 7 Democratic members of the Senate called for Cruz, along with his colleague Josh Hawley, to be investigated by the Senate Ethics Committee over their alleged involvement in the January 6th riots. Last we heard, I think it was about a year ago, there was no update. I've reached out to the Senate Ethics Committee as well as the senators involved in the complaint to see if they have any sort of update on that investigation, if there even is an investigation, and I haven't heard back yet.
Are Senate ethics investigations, are they swift? Do they drag their feet? What does that usually look like?
Let's go with option C. They are a giant waste of time. The Senate Ethics Committee is notorious for not enforcing anything. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe it's incredibly rare, if ever, that they've found somebody in violation of Senate rules.
And why is that? Just because it might be a little uncomfortable, holding your colleagues' feet to the fire? I mean, why is that?
Yeah, it's not exactly these aren't people who are going to be on the profiles in Courage anytime soon. I suspect that probably is the case. There's certainly a little bit there for the grace of God go I, and the House Ethics Committee isn't that much better. It has found a few people guilty, but I think the most recent example was Madison Cawthorn, who was on his way out the door and had already accused his colleagues of having cocaine-fueled orgies. So not a popular member to begin with.
So does this investigation that we're currently talking about between the Truth and Courage PAC and iHeartMedia, based on your reporting, does it have legs?
It seems like it should. I mean, it absolutely seems like we have the possibility here of the senator coordinating with a super PAC. And, I believe the Federal Election Commission will take a look at this. Based on the threshold we've seen for it to launch other investigations, it seems like it will take a look at this one.
So let's say Cruz is found to have violated campaign finance laws. What does that punishment look like?
He gets deported to Cancun. No, kidding. What will most likely happen is he will be fined either in his official capacity or less likely as an individual. He will have to repay some of those ill-gotten gains. The super PAC is also part of the complaint. It might have to repay, some of that money as well.
So his campaign has compared this to any other media hit. They've acted like he is volunteering his time here. This isn't a job. He's not financially benefiting in any way. So what happens to his podcast now?
It probably gets more attention and goes up the charts, if anything. It seems to do pretty well on the podcast playlist for U.S. political podcasts. So it seems like it very well may get some more attention. It has lost one advertiser. BP America is said that it does not want its ads playing on any political podcasts anymore. So there might be some other fallout from that, but that's probably the extent of it so far.
So in terms of this investigation, what's next? What are you looking out for? What's on your radar?
They filed the complaint, and unless somebody involved in the investigation wants to tell us, we're not really going to hear much at all until resolution is reached. They're not going to share a lot of the results really till it's done. So, it's possible that Campaign Legal will get a heads up at some point. It seems unlikely. I believe with the last complaint they filed, now this was with the House Ethics Committee, but I don't think they received a response, or Senate Ethics Committee. I don't think they received a response until after it had wrapped up. So it'll be a while. Senator Cruz may want to tell us something is on that as well.
Zach Everson, per usual, thank you so much for your reporting.
Pleasure to be here.